I'm based in Washington, D.C., and my pronouns are she and hers. Thanks to the support from AT&T Foundation and Sempra Energy, Equality California is able to help the LGBTQ community respond to the COVID-19 crisis. If you haven't already done so, I suggest you look at our website. We created the website to help people who are facing these terribly challenging times. The URL is covid19@eqca.org. So if you look at the website, you'll see that we've provided a number of links to services that are at the federal level, the state level, the local level with regard to employment, housing, food assistance, legal aid, domestic violence, and all sorts of other issues that people could be facing at this time. We've also been doing a number of webinars. This is our 8th webinar to help people, most of them focused on economic fallout, but also other areas where people need assistance. Today's topic is really interesting. It's a social impact job search. We really hope that this discussion is going to be a perfect way to help people who have lost their jobs or maybe lost their side incomes because of COVID. And we have an amazing speaker. Her name is Alexis Perrotta. She is the senior editor at Idealist. This is a nonprofit organization that brings together job listings and internships and opportunities to engage in social and racial justice. And I really found it super helpful and really, really interesting. So another thing that we've also got is a helpline. People can call up if you've got questions about your own personal circumstances. Suppose you've applied for unemployment and you haven't been getting phone calls back, or if you've had problems meeting your bills and you can't pay them. Maybe your landlord is trying to evict you and this is illegal. So we have a number of ways that we can help people who are facing crisis right now. So if you call our helpline, our staff is able to talk with you, one-on-one, and try to help to negotiate and navigate your personal circumstances. Just so you know, all of our webinars are recorded. They'll remain accessible on our website. We've got a chat box on, you'll see it on your screen. You can ask any questions you might have to our speaker today. They're not going to be visible to other people who are watching the webinar, but we can see them, and Alexis will be helpful to answer them. So if I may, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Alexis. We're thrilled to have you today. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and why you joined Idealist and what you're thinking.
Sure. So I am a lifelong nonprofit and public sector professional. I had, like a lot of other people, a fairly circuitous path to where I am now. I started my nonprofit career as an AmeriCorps volunteer. I did a year of service. Then I ended up working in informal education for a while and museum administration. Then I went and I earned my master's degree in public administration. And from there, got really interested in the workforce development space. So more focused on program implementation with the unemployed and underemployed. And that role kind of got me wanting something a little bit more creative. My work with government it was very fulfilling, but it made me realize that I wanted to stay in the space, but do something a little more creative. And then I actually leveraged pro bono work to ultimately kind of get me where I am today. Because my first experience really that I was able to put on my resume for writing specifically and communications, it was not paid experience, it was pro bono experience, but that was what caught the eye of my first paid writing job in the nonprofit space. And from there, I moved through as an editor and a writer and a content manager, and now at Idealist, where I've been for about 4 years, I'm the senior editor.
Oh, that's fantastic. It sort of sounds like you're an evangelist and like a perfect, like a poster child really for what Idealist does. I think we all sort of got started that way. I mean, my first jobs weren't paid, I mean, it was like $60 a month. I was doing this little column, but one thing leads to another. One of the things I love about Idealist website is, the different internships that you offer, recommend, different networks where people get together and, talk about opportunities and stuff. So yeah, all those informal ways of networking and building your skills and your people are incredibly helpful in terms of helping you find a job and helping others at this time. And so I understand that you have a PowerPoint to show us, and you'll walk us through what Idealist does.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I have a quick agenda where I'm going to give you a little bit more information about myself, but I think we've probably covered enough of it. I'm going to share a little bit more about what Idealist is, what we have done, what we're working on right now. I brought some numbers with me so I could share some, I have some California specific job listing data that hopefully will be interesting. And then just more about what people should know if they're considering switching into the nonprofit sector, if they're new to the nonprofit sector. We call folks who are switching, we refer to them as sector switchers. So you'll see a lot about sector switchers on the Idealist website. Then some suggestions for what to include or exclude from application materials, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. So just a little bit more about me. As I mentioned, I'm an AmeriCorps alum, lifelong nonprofit professional. I've been at Idealist for about 4 years. I think one thing that is probably the most interesting part of my background as far as this is concerned, this conversation is concerned, is it was really some pro bono work that I sort of stumbled upon, but really committed to for well over a year. I would say about 1.5 years, in addition to a full-time job. That was really the work that kind of got me going on the path that I was interested in. And so if there are more questions, later on about the specifics there, I'd be happy to share, because I think it's just a really important piece of the puzzle, and it is evidence that there's all sorts of legitimate experience that you can put on your resume, and it does not have to be paid experience, as long as you're representing it as unpaid experience. So anyway. Moving on to Idealist. So for folks who are not familiar with Idealist, just a little overview. We're based in New York, and we work with others in a spirit of generosity and mutual respect to help build a world where all people can lead free and dignified lives. We've been around since 1995, and since that time, we've connected more than 130,000 organizations with tens of millions of people, posted close to 1 million jobs, hundreds of thousands of internships and volunteer opportunities. And we've organized more than 250 graduate school fairs, built a graduate school directory, and helped people advance their social impact career. One little extra highlight to throw in there is we recently just kind of updated what we require in terms of organizations who are posting internships with us. So in the spirit of equity and access, we no longer allow organizations to post unpaid internships. We absolutely still have volunteer opportunities on the site. That's in a different section. And internships, the payment can be a stipend, it can be hourly pay, so there's a variety of what it can be, but just an important note that that's something that we recently changed and we think is really important in this space and a good thing to model. So at Idealist, we have our social impact job, volunteer, and internship listings, as I mentioned. We also recently built a mutual aid platform where people can go to either start their own mutual aid groups or to find a local mutual aid group near them. We also have a way to search COVID-specific volunteer opportunities, which obviously a lot of people are interested in right now. A lot of those are remote. Just FYI. We have our Idealist Career Advice blog. That's been a huge focus of my 4 years at Idealist, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. And then we have our Idealist grad school fairs, grad resources, and grad school directory. I have a URL down there, but our grad school fairs are all virtual this year. They're happening right now. I believe that there are 5 left. They're free to attend, and like I said, they're virtual, so they're really easy to attend. Anybody tuning in is even remotely curious about what grad school might look like for them in the social impact space, I would recommend checking it out. So starting with our job listings, we have our job search, which offers filtered search. So you could search jobs based on quite a few things: issue area, location, employment level, education level, organization type, full-time, part-time, and remote or on-site. We have our email alerts, and that basically just means that once you set up this complicated filter to search for your dream job, you can save that, and you can just click set up an email alert, and you can get an email anytime a new job that aligns with that filtered search is published on the site. We're also developing tools to help you better understand what you could be earning in the social impact space. So kind of stay tuned for that, I'd say. And we also have a resume database coming soon. So if you sign up with Idealist, we'll be letting people know whenever new free tools are being released, and it's just a great way to stay updated. So I would recommend dropping in your email. So on to Idealist career advice. Again, that's the space that I really joined Idealist to focus on, and I'm still very focused over there. So it's basically a career advice blog. We offer all sorts of tips and tools and templates to nonprofit professionals and aspiring nonprofit professionals and sector switchers. So some of the content that we offer on there that's more popular, we have an Ask Alexis column. That's kind of like a Dear Abby, where you can submit a question anonymously and we'll publish a response. And unsurprisingly, a lot of people in the space have similar questions, so they tend to get a lot of traffic and a lot of responses. We have something called Template Toolbox, where we just offer templates for all sorts of things that a nonprofit professional might need. So we have a template if you're looking to transition out of a job, how to put together a transition plan. We have templates for post-interview thank you emails. We even have a template for extended leave, what to put in your out of office message if you're going on new parent leave, for example. I would say our most popular column is called Interview Q&A. That's where we take one popular interview question and we sort of break it down by, we start with what a hiring manager really wants to get out of you by asking you that question. And then we sort of help guide you through a structure to put together an honest but organic and thorough response to those questions. We also have quizzes. Some of them are more serious about your work style and your management style. Some of them are a little more lighthearted. We offer diversity, equity, and inclusion content. We've been focusing more on that in the past year and a half to 2 years, I would say. So we have a lot more of that coming out all the time. And then we just have a lot of sort of basic resources for online learning and professional development. So that's Idealist career advice. So just a quick look at some of the numbers that I brought along. So I guess the caveat here is that this data was current as of September 18th, 2020. So that's when all this data was pulled. But it's, you know, more or less, this is a great snapshot of what's happening right now. So specific to California, as of September 18th, we had 575 total active jobs that were listed as specifically based in California. Now that's not including jobs that have no location or are remote or flexible, or maybe are headquartered in one place, but the job, you know, can be somewhere else, all of those things. But of those 575, 132 of those total active jobs were considered remote. And then I know it doesn't seem like a big number, but that was a 2% increase in jobs listed in the state of California from August to September. As you can imagine, from March to April, we took a big hit. There were not a lot of jobs being posted. I would say very similar issue from April to May, and then things started kind of like inching back up. We're getting better. I think people are sort of crawling back in the space, and organizations are really starting to list jobs again. So it's just a good sign that things are moving in the right direction in terms of hiring in the sector. So this, I just wanted to kind of show a breakdown about, or on different professional levels, just to give a really nice illustration of how much variety there is on Idealist, and not just on Idealist, but variety of job types in the social impact sector, excuse me. So the first one, none, you can consider none it's more or less the same thing as any, because it's the employer, the person who posted the job, just declined to select an option. But aside from that, we have professional level jobs, managerial, entry level, executive level. So a really nice variety. The organizations with the most listings as of September 18th included Tipping Point Community, which is an organization fighting poverty in the Bay Area, Los Angeles Education Partnership, College Track Inc., working for equity in education, Chinatown Community Development, and Tides, which is an organization working toward large-scale social change. So those are kind of like the big hiring and listing organizations in your neck of the woods. So working in the nonprofit sector, I always kind of like to start with myths around the nonprofit, or kind of myths and cliches, I guess you could really say, about working in the nonprofit space, because I think it's really important that people understand that it's probably not what they think it is, or maybe what they learned it is. So kind of to go in knowing what's going on and what to expect. So the first one, not being able to earn a comfortable living in the space. Right now, the average salary for the California-based jobs listed on Idealist, which this is for jobs that actually list a salary. So unfortunately, not all of the organizations do, even though we encourage them to, but it's about $74,000. Regarding upward mobility, while organizations seem to be adopting a flatter org chart, there's still a lot of opportunity to carve out a career path. And there's typically more space in the nonprofit sector than the private sector to create your own role to a certain extent. Things change, the news changes, issue areas develop and evolve. And anecdotally, if the peripheral work of an organization shifts, they tend to look for people who are already on the team to adopt that new work. So there's definitely room to grow in the sector. This is a fun one. Everyone that works in the sector is really nice. People, you're laughing. People need to be prepared for office politics in the same way that we prepare for them in the private sector. Obviously, they're not guaranteed. And the beautiful thing about the social impact space is that all the staff at a single organization are working toward a common goal, whether they're deeply passionate about it or not. But remember, it's still the real world. In terms of nonprofit organizations being inefficient, more and more nonprofit boards and grant-making organizations are asking for data-driven decision-making and measurable results. So you'll actually see that quite a few analytics and analyst positions are listed on idealist.org, and this just speaks to the sector's shift to a focus on efficiency and results and data-driven decision-making. And finally, just this sense of, well, I love volunteering, so why wouldn't I love working in the nonprofit sector? Job in the social impact space requires the same level of research and consideration as a job in any other sector. And just because you enjoyed maybe walking the dogs at your local shelter doesn't necessarily mean that you want to join their accounting department, and that's completely fine. Tips for people who are new to the space or who are looking to move into the space. So we have an exercise that we often suggest people sort of take out for a spin. It's called the Target Employer List. Basically, the idea here is just to encourage people to search for organizations that interest them and not just opportunities. So you put down, we have a template that we can share to kind of keep track of all the information, but you put down a list of organizations that kind of pique your interest. Maybe you're dying to work for them, maybe you follow them on social media, whatever it is, you're interested in them. And then you'll kind of go through and figure out what it is about these organizations that interest you to try to connect the dots. So is it location, mission, reputation, size? It can be any of those things. They're all completely legitimate answers. But the exercise can really help you uncover a lot about what's important to you. So, we suggest, we have a spreadsheet, like I mentioned, that can be shared, that we use, but you could also do it in a Trello board or however you want to track the information. And it just allows you to track the reasons that you're interested in an organization, whether they're hiring and for what positions, and and who you've been in contact with at each particular organization. Finding your fit. I just encourage prospective nonprofit professionals to really understand job titles and what the job titles are in the space, and potentially how there are some job titles that exist in the nonprofit space that they might be different than what you're used to. And I think a really great example of this is, my husband is an engineer in the private sector. And when I talk about development work or development jobs, he always is like, oh, I didn't know that you guys had, like engineers at Idealist or whatever, which we do. But when we're talking about development in the nonprofit space, we're talking about fundraising, event planning, managing board relationships. So it's just really important to know what titles actually exist in the sector, and then how your current skills might translate into one of those titles, because the title might surprise you. Volunteering intentionally. I think it's really useful to choose volunteer opportunities more intentionally, opportunities that allow for networking, and definitely opportunities that allow for some sort of shareable final project or product or data or results. So this doesn't have to mean that, like, at the end of your volunteer position, you're turning in a white paper on food insecurity in California, but it could mean that you manage an organization's social media and you're tracking increased engagement over your time volunteering with that organization, and you have that data to take away from you. It could mean that you wrote an email to donors and that you were granted access to track open and click-through rates to that email. So any sort of measurable takeaways from a volunteer opportunity is going to make it that much more helpful on your resume. And then finally, I think this is one that I think is most important, is learning to speak the same language as the organizations that you want to work for, as well as just generally the same language as other folks in the sector. Some examples are, we tend to say organization rather than company, supervisor instead of boss. Some organizations spell nonprofit with a hyphen, and others, like Idealist, stick to one word. So you'll really want to mirror the values of the sector by mirroring the language of the sector, both in your application materials as well as in conversation. When I'm interviewing somebody for a position at Idealist and they are using what I consider to be a little bit more private sector vocabulary, as opposed to like translating it into social impact vocabulary, it does actually set off like a little bit of an alarm bell for me. So for resumes and cover letters, I just have some suggestions about what to include and what to leave out. So specific names, to whom it may concern, is not a deal breaker, but if you have a hiring manager's name, definitely include it. And if you don't, you could always do some digging online, see if you can determine to whom this particular role would report, and then consider addressing it to that person. And if you're not confident that you found the right person, you can always consider including the name of the person in charge of HR or recruitment. A cover letter is not an opportunity to repeat everything on your resume, nor is it a space to share your entire life story. So you should be using this real estate to create a compelling personal and professional story that'll leave the reader thinking that you understand the position and the organization and that you're the best fit for the job. So this is not terribly different from how you would do it for a job in any sector. I recommend keeping it to 4 short paragraphs. So introducing, or I guess your introduction would have a mention of the job, the hiring organization, and a specific reference to show that you understand what they're looking for and what they do, but all of that should exist in like 2 or 3 sentences. Then moving on to a short paragraph about your current role and how it's prepared you for the role for which you're applying. A 3rd paragraph, if you have current side projects, volunteer work, pro bono work, etc., that you want to highlight, you can use the 3rd paragraph to weave that into your professional story. And then 4th paragraph is just kind of like wrapping it up and saying thanks. Again, back to some language mirroring. Another thing to keep an eye out for in your cover letter and application is, does the organization usually refer to themselves by their full name? Even if their website, their URL doesn't have capitals in it, which websites don't, capital letters or hyphens or whatever. Make sure that you use a few reference points to really make sure that you know how the organization refers to themselves and refer to them that way as well. A really good example of that is Charity Water, because their name is, it's all lowercase, and I believe that it's charity : space water. And I know they have like a hardcore style guide, and they're really like strict about their brand. So I would imagine that if somebody does it the wrong way in their application materials, they're not going to be thrilled about it. Great organization though, nothing against them. What else? Of course, you know, make sure that you're not including any errors. So that could be the name of the person that you're applying to, the name of the organization, which happens. People, since a lot of people copy their application materials, they have the wrong organization. But we have a bunch of resources to help you sort of dig out and fix any common typos that people often include in cover letters and resumes. And it's a lot more about formatting and punctuation, but we can share those resources with you as well. And then what to include and leave out on your resume. Your entire resume doesn't need to be strictly measurable accomplishments, but it's important to have some peppered in here and there. So make sure that you have at least a few measurable and quantifiable examples of your work. That can be dollars raised, increase in social media followers, like we talked about before, or email open rates. Make space for courses, workshops, and even conferences that may not fit neatly into a more traditional education section. I have a section on my resume for additional coursework. Speaking of passion projects and side hustles, I also have space on my resume for pro bono and freelance work, as well as a section on my resume to list volunteer positions. So like I said in the beginning, don't try to pass it off as paid work if it was not paid, but be sure to find a good way to highlight this very legitimate experience. And then in terms of kind of acronyms or lingo, aside from using any acronyms that the hiring organization uses to refer to themselves, try to avoid acronyms and lingo. You know, if I told you that when I finished my year of service with AmeriCorps, I went on to work at CMD for 3 years, thanks to my internship at BCM, chances are you would have no idea what I was talking about, nor should you. So that's kind of it for resume. And I think that's pretty much it for the presentation. So I think we can move on to questions.
Alexis, that was awesome. Super, super helpful and really appreciative. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box. We will be asking them of Alexis. As I said, no one else can see the questions that you post, but obviously Alexis and I can, and we'll answer those for you. So if you just joined us after our webinar began, welcome to Equality California's 8th webinar in our COVID series. Today's topic is social impact job search. And our speaker is Alexis Perrotta. She is the senior editor at Idealist, which is a nonprofit organization that brings together job listings, internships, volunteer opportunities, and ways to engage in social and racial justice. So Alexis, I have a couple of questions for you, and maybe we can just sort of get started. What would you advise people who are looking for jobs who maybe have job gaps in their resume? You know, some people may have problems with sort of a linear chronology, and should they ignore those, or like how best to?
I mean, I kind of always go by honesty is the best policy. So job gaps, I guess I should kind of clarify. Are you talking about job gaps in terms of things that an individual may choose to include or to leave off of their resume, or?
Well, no, I mean, I'm just thinking about, so for example, like, you know, we're in this COVID time. So, you know, I mean, obviously there's no shame to having lost your job. So, you know, I'm sure that some people now will say like, well, you know, I was laid off and, you know, I've had some trouble getting back on the thing, but suppose they had lost a job maybe like last year and then COVID has happened. And so then there's this sort of gap of time, or if they can't really account for it, you know, they can't quickly say that, you know, they were, you know, enrolled in school, or they had a side gig or something. How would you sort of advise people to manage their a job history that may not be so linear.
So I think that's really what your cover letter is for. A resume kind of is what it is. You shouldn't be hiding things. You shouldn't be trying to hide things. And that's what an interview is for anyway. Questions are going to come up about things that don't completely add up for the interviewer, whether it's a job gap or whether it's why it looks like you only spent 2 months at that job or what have you. I think some of those things can just be sort of put to the side and addressed in an interview setting proactively if possible, rather than waiting for the question. But then you can also kind of get into it in a cover letter. So I think that's sort of that third paragraph that I mentioned in a cover letter that you might reserve for your volunteer, whatever your current volunteer work is, or your current pro bono project or whatever. But I would recommend it even if the job gap wasn't specifically because you were like earning your master's degree or something like that, finding something to put in that space. You don't have to have earned a degree or a certificate or learned a new language or, volunteer 3 days a week or anything like that, but you should have something to put in that space. So it might be, you might have to get a little creative with it. You can talk about a new interest that you explored deeply. You can talk about, I know a lot of people are going to be talking about how they manage their child's education from home. I mean, all of these things, for better or worse, the whole pandemic and the COVID crisis, I think has made everybody a little more understanding and accepting of other people's very unique situations and struggles when it comes to career stuff.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea, or response. What about, again, because so many people have lost their jobs, I think something like, 30 million people have lost their jobs. And now, maybe the sector that they were in or their job that they're in, no longer exists. The business has gone bankrupt or it's closed and they're not sure when they're going to reopen. They're thinking about pivoting to another sector altogether. Do you have any advice for those people? And also then how would you also advise people who are looking maybe at a salary that's, much reduced from what they used to be earning?
So in terms of sector switching, I guess it's worth noting that in the nonprofit space or in the social impact space, there are definitely areas, fields, issue areas that continue to grow and seem to be, for the most part, kind of recession proof, I guess we would call it. So education, we're always hiring for education positions. Mental health related organizations, mental health related work. What else? Mental health, education, social work, which obviously requires a degree. So that's, harder to transition into, of course, if you don't have the experience. But there are definitely sectors that continue to grow. And what was there? So for somebody who's looking to transition into the nonprofit space potentially, and they have a sense of what they're interested in, but not necessarily the completely translatable experience, or at least, it doesn't look that way on a piece of paper. What I have done myself and what I encourage people to do is kind of create that work for themselves. So I think a really good example is if you're a writer and you're interested in writing in the nonprofit space, especially now, every organization has grant writers, or most organization has a grant writer. And right now, like I was just on Idealist like yesterday, and there are tons of grant writer positions listed. If you don't specifically have experience writing a grant, you can actually go online, find your favorite organization, search for grants that that organization might actually apply for, and put together an application using you have access to their Form 990 and their annual review and their website and their social media. And then you kind of have this, of course, it's not real, you created it, but you have this final product that you could show somebody in an interview. If you really actually wanted to work at that organization, you can reach out to them proactively and send them this grant proposal that you put together on their behalf. So even if the work is not, even if you kind of came up with it yourself, you could still kind of put it in your portfolio. And then I guess one other thing that I would recommend is it's really useful to have a professional website for yourself, because this is another opportunity for you to, beyond a resume, beyond a cover letter, for you to really choose what parts of yourself you want to feature and you want a potential employer to see, because you could put that URL on your resume. You know, again, if you're a writer, if you're interested in writing, but you don't have paid writing experience, you're the one who's going to be creating the copy for that website. So that's a really beautiful example of the kind of work that you could do, but you might not have been able to show an employer had you just sent along your application material.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. In fact, that reminds me that one of the other webinars we did was on how to help people, you know, best write their LinkedIn profile, how to present themselves on social media, how maybe to, you know, remove some things that wouldn't be a good thing to have out there, but, you know, how best to position themselves. And we've also done a number of things for entrepreneurs, people who want to start their own businesses. And so there's lots of different ways. If you look back through our other webinars, you'll be able to see some of the information that Alexis just talked about, and it's more seamless. I understand that we have a poll that we're going to put up to the people who are on this webinar, asking them if they're looking for jobs and something. Maybe this will be helpful to you, Alexis, in sort of seeing who's watching now and what kinds of needs they may have. And so if you could just answer those questions. Obviously the panelists and I can't answer them, but anyone who's watching, if you can please fill this out, it'll be helpful for Alexis, and then maybe we can shape our conversation a little bit. Alexis, while the poll is up, maybe I could ask you a question. Obviously, Equality California is an LGBT civil rights organization, and some people maybe have faced discrimination in the past, either you know, because they are non-binary, maybe they're transgender and they've changed their name, possibly people who are older, people who are younger. Do you have any thoughts about sort of how to respond to job discrimination? And I would imagine that most of the jobs that are listed on Idealist, of course, you know, are coming from organizations that are coming through the lens of social and you know, social justice and equity. But if you have any recommendations or thoughts for everyone, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's always fair, regardless of what space the job exists in, to kind of look for those signals, to sort of make sure that the organization that you want to work for passed your own personal litmus test, and that it's a place that you'd feel comfortable and proud working at. So in terms of kind of gauging an organization in that sense, I would say looking for all kinds of cues can be I would say relatively easy to do before you really even get a foot in the door. So I would suggest looking at, you know, privacy policies, equal opportunity employment policies, anything like that that's listed on their website. That stuff really should, well, actually, I don't know if that's a state by state thing. So maybe not everybody has to have that stuff listed, but I think they do. But it's worth digging in to see really what they spell out in there and what they're all about. You can look on, I know it's pretty basic, but looking on Glassdoor, you can find a lot of people who have a lot to say. Specifically in the nonprofit space, people love to talk about when an organization does not live their mission. I think there's also, quite honestly, a lot of talk about that in like the sort of private, socially entrepreneurial startup space right now as well. But yeah, you could definitely check on Glassdoor and see what people are saying there. You might keep an eye out if you do kind of get a foot in the door and maybe you have a screening call. Does the hiring manager, whoever it is that reaches out to you via email, are they putting their pronouns in their email signature? You know, that could be like a little signal. Yeah, I think those are kind of all good ways to look for signals. I think that's pretty much my list. But we do have some content that's going to be published over the course of the next 2 weeks about specifically that speaks to job searching while non-binary and also starting a job in that same situation. So hopefully people can find some good good
Oh, great.
suggestion.
How would people find out about those areas?
So I can, I don't have the live links yet because they haven't gone up, but I can share publication dates or live links when we have them so that they can go out after the call.
No, fantastic. Yeah, we will be putting, any resources that you share with us. I see that you have some in the chat box. We've posted already, but we will continue to add. Our website is evergreen, so as new information comes in and new resources, we always provide these to our visitors and keep them on the website. So I wanted to ask you a question. So you said you have a career advice column, basically, on Idealist, and I'm sort of wondering, and it's called Interview Q&A. Like, what kinds of questions do you get? Is there any question that you get repeatedly that you think people would find helpful to know about, and how you answer those questions?
So for the interview Q&A or for the like Ask Alexis column?
Oh, are those two different things? I guess, yeah, I guess, I guess, yeah, here, we'll do your Dear Abby part, like, Dear Abby in the job space, what kinds of questions you get, and then also maybe the interview Q&A. Yeah, I guess those are two separate platforms.
I think things that we get quite often have to do with addressing ageism in the job search, which is a really hard thing, quite honestly, to address because it is a really hard thing to specifically put your finger on. But we do offer a lot of suggestions and resources, some of them on Idealist and some of them like outside organizations that specifically serve sort of mid and late career professionals who are maybe re-entering the workforce after a break for whatever reason. So yeah, we get a lot of questions about ageism, and we try to at least address sort of the brush up tips, I guess, in those situations. So we do have a lot of suggestions about specifically for people who are dealing with ageism in the job search, what skills they may want to brush up on, or what new skills they may want to learn, how they might format their resume, how resume formatting might be different than it was the last time they looked for a job. I'm trying to think of a good example. One, like, quick little tip that we've definitely shared with people on several different occasions was not really needing to include things like Microsoft Office and PowerPoint on your resume anymore. We kind of consider those to be like fairly obvious. Most people can use them. Even if you can, it might not be a tool that people are still using anymore anyway. And it can kind of signal the opposite of what you want it to if you include it on your resume. So it even if you're including it because you are like really advanced in Excel, if you're really advanced in Excel, you should say it very explicitly. But otherwise, it kind of makes you sound less tech savvy than you are. So ageism, we get a lot of questions about sector switching. So moving into the nonprofit sector, especially without previous nonprofit experience, how to move from a volunteer position potentially into a paid position. Those are kind of like the tried and true questions that we get quite a lot of. And you can find all sorts of those on the site.
Awesome. So we have a couple questions that have come in the chat box. I'll just read the first one to you. Thanks for all the info. Why do some employers post salary information and others don't? What is the appropriate point to ask for a salary range? Before applying or during the video? And then the person goes on to say, I know that there is a law in California that requires employers to share compensation information after a reasonable request from the applicant. Yeah. But that person's right. I mean, so often you see job listings and you have no idea, what they might be. And as you said, you could look at Glassdoor to sort of see what comparable jobs are. But that's a really good question. Why do some employers do it, others don't? And what's the best time to ask?
First of all, that's really interesting about the law in California. And it makes me wonder, like, what is considered sort of a reasonable request. But I think that's great that that's happening somewhere. We try really hard to encourage our listing organizations to list salary. It's obvious. We need to know. We're not yeah, a lot of us love what we do, but we're all still working to earn a paycheck and to pay our bills. So it's definitely not something that we're thrilled about, but it just doesn't always happen, and that's unfortunate. I would say in terms of when you would actually inquire about the salary, I think that's a very, very personal question. If there's any sort of work sample being asked for by a hiring organization, if you kind of get into the, obviously you wouldn't ask about it in the application process because that's completely unnecessary, casts you in a bad light. It's not the right time to do it. If you make it through a screening, I would say you could even still hold off on asking. But if it gets to the point where you're committing any serious time or effort into applying for this job, whether it's going into, I don't know what's happening in California right now. In New York, I don't think too many people are going into an office to interview for anything in person, but if you're traveling to an interview, if you're going somewhere to interview, if you're taking a day off from your current job to go to an interview, or especially if you're asked for any kind of time-intensive work sample, I think it is completely fair to ask what the salary is, because once you start investing more than just the time it takes to apply for the job, some people might think this is like a little too aggressive. But I've been in situations where I've been asked to put together a work sample that probably would have taken me about 10 to 15 hours to put together. And I just had to say, like, hold on a second, like, what's the salary for this role? Because this is, I have a full-time job and 10 or 15 hours is a big deal. So yeah, it's a little bit of a case-by-case question, but my personal opinion is that when you are asked to spend like any sort of significant amount of your own time or effort applying or moving forward in the hiring process, I think that's the time to ask. I do also, I would say, if that doesn't come up and you are in the interview process and it is in a situation where you feel like you're putting in like more time and effort than you should before you know the salary, I would say when you do ask that question, it shouldn't be like sort of fired off in like a casual email. It should be really like thoughtfully put together and preferably in person or on the phone, because I think it could come off as a little funny if you just throw it into an email.
We have a comment that's very similar to the first one, and I don't know, I'll just read it to you. Possibly you'll have some other thoughts. It says, I'm often nervous that asking for a salary range will reflect negatively on me. But on the other hand, I don't want to waste my time applying for a job that pays less than I'm making now or looking for. Any suggestions of what to do in those situations? I think you pretty much covered that, but I mean, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, there are laws that are being implemented in certain states at this point also about salary history, whether or not a hiring organization can ask you about your salary history. And on the flip side of that, I wouldn't suggest throwing anything about your salary history into your application materials voluntarily to like maybe signal to the organization, here's what I make and here's where I'm comfortable. I wouldn't do that, just as like a little side note. But yeah, otherwise I think hopefully I answered that question.
Mm-hmm, you did. And of course, I'm thinking about other things, sort of like the ban the box. This is for people who've been incarcerated and they're coming out. Obviously, that would be, say, one of those job gap times that I mentioned, that I'm not really sure how that could be addressed properly in the cover letter. And that might be more of a unique issue that someone maybe would approach Idealist and say, like, how would I deal with this? But there is obviously, I think in California, maybe a law where people, who are applying for a job, if they have been incarcerated, and they've got a period of time that they don't want to account for right off the bat, that the employers are not allowed to ask that question if you've ever been convicted of a felony until after the first round of interviewing process has gone on and you become like a serious candidate, just not putting it on the application itself to give people more of a fair shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tricky. Unfortunately, that it is definitely not an area that I have any expertise in, but I know that there are a lot of like organizations around that do support specifically like workforce reentry and all of that, which is amazing that they do that. I personally couldn't really speak to it though.
No. So we have, this might be our final question. Are all jobs listed as remote now, or should we stick to looking for jobs in our geographical area? Which is a great question, really, because we don't know how long COVID's going to last. I mean, it could just be, for the next few months, or it could be for all of 2021. And, obviously, if you're living in California, you're not going to apply for a job that is based somewhere else. But, on the other hand, there could be as many as, 15 months ahead.
Mm-hmm.
What is your thought?
It's a great question. And even before COVID, we had an issue, when you have like that many organizations posting that many jobs, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a different understanding of what some of these checkboxes mean, when they list the job. So even before COVID, we did have situations where organizations would check remote for the job, even if it wasn't really remote. So it can be a little confusing. It's definitely a state by state thing at this point. I mean, I can tell you in New York, and generally in the Northeast, like I don't know anybody who has started a job recently that has started in the office. I think it's still worthwhile, definitely looking at Idealist, looking at our remote positions, because there are still a lot of those and they're still being added. But I do not think it's a waste of time to look outside of your geographical area, especially because sometimes it says like remote possible on the job listing on Idealist. But if you're looking at a job that does not say remote possible and it's not near where you live, I still think you can absolutely apply to that job as long as you're signaling somewhere on your resume or in your cover letter that you either are or are not willing to relocate. If you are anticipating relocation, you should put that on there as well. All of that information is going to be useful. And I certainly know of hiring managers who thought that they were hiring for a role where you had to be in DC. And this was even before COVID. It turned out I didn't get enough good local applicants. So now I'm going to let it be remote. I changed my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, Alexis, I think we're sort of coming to the end of our time. You've just been amazing, so helpful, really, as I mentioned to you, early before the webinar even started, that I started looking at everything that Idealist does, and it's super impressive. I mean, just scope of jobs and the opportunities for volunteering and, the networking opportunities, and then asking questions and career advice. It's an amazing organization, and, you should be proud of working there, and you've really helped, I think, so many people. And we're really grateful to you for everything you've explained to us today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Alexis, I don't know if you have any last couple words, and if there's some way that people could, I don't know if you want people to connect with you on LinkedIn or something, that would be great. For anyone who has any specific questions going forward, that would be wonderful.
I'm definitely open to that. I can even pop back. So that slide also has my email on it, and you could feel free to email me any questions. Check us out on Idealist, so you can definitely look at the career advice space. That's still kind of my domain. I would say if you have questions, career-related questions, social impact career-related questions, and you're not finding the answers to those on Idealist, email me and let me know, because we have myself, a few other people on staff, a whole bunch of freelance writers, and we want to fill those gaps for you. So if you can't find the resource you're looking for, let me know so we can create the resource you're looking for. And just, thank you so much for having me today. And I really hope this was useful for folks.
Well, we're really delighted. So you can see on your screen that there is a poll about asking how helpful the webinar is. This is super helpful to us to help us, plan other webinars and going forward. So if you could answer if it's been extremely helpful, very helpful, somewhat helpful, not so helpful, or not at all helpful, it'd be really helpful to us. Well, again, Alexis, thank you so much. You've been amazing, and we look forward to keeping in touch, and we really appreciate you being such a resource to our community and to so many other people. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye now.